Welcome back to Real Dreams TV. I'm your host, Glenn Gilliam, and I've got a special guest that I'm going to be interviewing and showing clips of that. But as you know, this is the last Saturday of Black History Month. And as most of you know, I am the director of national screenings and educational outreach for the film Althea by Rex Miller. And we've got a treat because her doubles partner, who you might have seen in the recent documentary just shown this past Monday on Althea and Arthur Ashe, Angela Buxton is my guest for interview that's very enlightening with details you might not have heard before. I hope you enjoy it and look forward to your comments. Enjoy. Well, we're here back at the Grand Hyatt Hotel in Midtown Manhattan, and we have the distinct honor of speaking with Angela Buxton. For many of you, you may not know her today, but she was a contemporary on the pro tennis circuit out of the UK and played with Althea Gibson in the late 50s. She was also a friend and confidant, and we're so gracious to have her here and giving us a little bit of insight as to her relationship and what she's doing today. Angela, it's great to see you. We had a little bit of technical difficulty, but I'm very happy that you've stuck around. But let's pick up where we were talking, especially about your upbringing and coming up during the war, spending time in Johannesburg, spending time in South Africa, and you had a relationship with a young lady you mentioned, a young black girl, but you were talking about also there was a woman that was looking for employment. Tell us about her.
Well, after we lived in Cape Town for 18 months, we lived in Johannesburg for 4.5 years, and during that time, in this flat in which um, we had a knock on the door, and there was a young black girl who was looking for a cleaning job. My mother didn't really need a cleaning, but she took her in to give her a few pounds, and then one day, after she'd been with us for a month or so, she arrived at the door with a very tiny baby. And my mother said, "Whose is that?" She said, "It's mine." She said, "I've just had it and I've got nowhere to live." And my mother said, "Well, um, I don't want to turn you away." She said, "But we haven't really got room here." But on the other hand, she said, "We have the stoop. In South Africa, the verandas that are part of the apartment, or even the verandas on houses, they're called stoops, STOOP. And she said, you're welcome to use that if you want to, and I can make up a bed with 2 chairs and give you a blanket." She said, "It won't be awfully comfortable, but you can have that if you want to. I don't want to turn you away if you've got nowhere to live," which we did, and she did. And then the manager of the block of flats came around the next morning, Mr. Gardner, I remember him distinctly, and he said, "Have you got a black lady living here with a baby?" My mother said yes. He said, "I'm afraid that it's not allowed in this block of flats. She'll have to go." So my mother turned to my brother and myself. She said, "Pack your bags, loves, we're going. We'll all go." And that was another instance which stayed with me all my life, and which I couldn't really understand. When my mother was offering a helping hand to somebody, why be so objectionable about it?
Just curious, I mean, in talking about those instances so many years ago, I mean, we're talking about the 40s, I'm assuming. Is there any relationship in terms of any of the things you've seen either at home in the UK or when you come here to America that gives you any feeling that things haven't changed that much, or have you seen things actually grow and get better?
Well, to all intents and purposes, one is led to believe that things have got better. I mean, e.g., you have a black president of the United States now, for example. But I've got the feeling that that is not the case, and I still feel that there are rumblings that there are hardships against the black people, and certainly in Europe against Jewish people at the moment it's getting worse by the day. In fact, in many parts of Europe, it's almost like it was in the 1930s prior to the World War II.
just curious, because I mean, I know we spoke earlier. You were saying the Jewish New Year is going to be starting just tomorrow, and you'll be celebrating that, of course, with all of the things that are going on with. And I don't want to get into a political conversation. That's not what we're here about. But of course, the Iran nuclear deal has preoccupied so much of the news recently. What are you seeing? I mean, in Europe, is there more of a nativist feel, or do you feel like people are not embracing the support of Israel the way they used to?
Well, I don't know about the way they used to,
Okay.
but no, I think Israelis have a hard time. They don't seem to realize it when they're living there, but it seems much harder from a distance. But you know, hopefully with a bit of luck and God's support, we'll get through it. But business with Iran and the nuclear bomb, I mean, it's very, very near to Israel. With 1 second of the wrong movement, they could blow up Israel quite easily in a second because they're so close.
But they would be spelling their demise immediately. They would not last. I mean, it wouldn't last another second, of course. The U.S. and our allies would be immediately leveling Iran. They would never stand a chance. I mean, we all hope and pray, obviously, that never comes to pass. But I don't think Iran is foolish enough, as much as they talk a lot. Hopefully, they don't. I don't think that would come to the occasion. And I don't want to sour this conversation with that, because we're talking about much happier things. But in terms of discrimination back in those days, what your mother did was outstanding, of course, and we're so grateful that you were able to befriend Althea. When you first met her and you guys got along, how did you come to start playing together?
After I met her as a schoolgirl, there was about a 4-year gap, which time I was late teens, and I'd become number 4 in England, and I was sent by our Lawn Tennis Association to play in the Asian and Indian Championships in Delhi and Calcutta. Now, as it happens, by the wisdom of your government at the time, they had decided, this was 1955, that they were going to try and increase the goodwill of the country and send a goodwill team of blacks and whites in the form of tennis players to the Far East to play exhibition matches and tournaments. And Althea actually had just retired, and she'd hung up her racket and she'd made an application to join the American Army. And but this came just before the interview for that, and I did meet the person. Actually, she was supposed to be interviewing years later, and she said, "Whatever happened to Althea Gibson? She never showed up for the interview." But your government stepped in at that very important time in her life and offered her this trip, which was quite sensational because there was all expenses paid, going to a far-off country. And she was asked to go with a girl, a beautiful blonde girl from Miami called Carol Fagaros, who was complete opposite to Althea, in that Althea was black and dark, and so on. This girl was blonde and white and very pretty. And then you had 2 fellows. I think it was Herbie Flam, and there was another one who was, I can't quite remember his name, but it'll come back to me later on, who was the captain of the team. Now, as it happened, we both landed up in the same place. Now, and I was one of 4 in the team as well, but the other girl on the team, whose name was Pat Ward, she didn't pay attention to, you must watch what you eat. And she was ill for the whole month we were there. She never left her room. Because she was eating, I suppose, the wrong food. So she never hit a ball, and I was left without a female compatriot. So I joined the Americans, and I would practice with them, played with them, went sightseeing and so on. And I got to know them both very well, and they became very good friends of mine. And during that time, Althea talked to me. Of course, she didn't remember me about signing the autograph because I was only a young schoolgirl. But she talked to me and she said that, I'd quite like to use this return ticket to hang on to it and not go back to America, but perhaps go to different tournaments that I could find in Europe and the Far East and the Middle East and stretch it out so I could have another go at Wimbledon. What did you think? And she said, if I don't manage it, then I can always use the return ticket I've got here later on. I think you ought to do that. And I'll see you in Paris at the French Indoor Championships, which was in February, always has been. And she said, fine. But you see, in those days, there was no money in the game. But on the other hand, she was a great pull at the gate because she was so extraordinary. There was nobody like her. First of all, she was black. Second of all, she hit the ball like stink. And she looked like a young man, as I said. And people really wanted to see her because she was unusual. So she was quite a draw. And I think from that point of view, you see, I thought she would make it because she had to, the only way you could get any funds at all in those days was you could say like, oh, I've just travelled from New York to Calcutta, which of course she may have just come from Delhi to Calcutta, but she did live in New York, and so she could claim travel expenses from the management of the tournament, but she could say that at every stop, you see, and then you can accumulate some money that way, and that's what she did. But she wasn't sure she could do it. She wasn't the draw at that time that she became later on, but she was a draw nevertheless. But she became much bigger by the summertime of that year.
And you two, did you end up playing doubles together?
Yes. Well, when I saw her in Paris in February, she managed to get that far. She hadn't used her ticket. She still had it in her handbag, and I think we did play doubles together. There. No, we didn't, because the first tournament we played was actually in the French in the summertime, in May, because she never had a partner. She never played. Well, she played with Carol, of course, in the exhibition, but she never really had a partner. The Americans, apart from Carol, never even spoke to her, let alone played with her. I mean, she used to sit there, and the American players would look right through her, and I didn't understand why, because I found her quite friendly. And so when it came to the closing of the entries in like the fifth day of the tournament, they were closing the entries for the doubles. My coach, Mr. C.M. Jones, said to me, you seem very friendly with Althea Gibson. Why don't you ask her to play doubles with you? So I said, well, you know, she might not want to say no to me. She probably doesn't want to play because she's not playing. I didn't realize that nobody had ever asked her to play. And I said, why don't you ask her? She'll say no to you if she doesn't want to play. Much easier than saying no to me. So we did. And she said, oh, yes, I'd love to play with Angie. She used to call me Angie, you see. So the entries closed that evening, and we got in the afternoon, and of course we won the championships and the French. And then I said, how about Wimbledon? She said, yeah, fine. And that's how it happened.
That's absolutely amazing. I couldn't want for more of these stories. It's so exciting to think about the fact that you had this close tie to her, and as you say, Americans weren't as accommodating or friendly. What I know we learned in the documentary about your clothing line. And the fact that you had a talent for sewing and designing.
Yes.
Tell us about that. Althea was a model of some sort? Or?
Well, yes, when 1957, by this time I'd had a bad wrist injury and I was off the courts, off playing, and I went and I had a degree in dress design and pattern cutting and so on. So I went to follow that, pursue that as a career. And one of the stars by this time, 1957, was Althea Gibson, and she was staying with me, and we were more than friendly. I mean, she called my mother Mom, and my mother called her one of her girls, you know, I mean, it was a very, very close relationship. And so we were looking for stars. So we gave her, I know, some shorts and a shirt and a sort of jacket. It was like a red um, velour jacket to play in, which she did.
That's fantastic. I mean, did that line persist after those years of
Yes, I still, I'm not working in fashion anymore, but I did for quite a while, and I still do a lot of sewing, and of course now I do a lot of traveling. I can't use my machine, so I sew that, but I still continue to make things and make things bigger and smaller and shorter and longer and so on by hand, and I find it very relaxing, and I do it all the time. Still doing it today before I met you.
well, that's, I mean, it's so engaging to find out how that career or that path led to another opportunity where you were trying to give Althea a little more exposure and help your brand. But just curiously, with regards to what I guess was more of going towards the end of her career, and getting to the point where she wasn't able to see a real living out of playing tennis. We do know that she went on to play professional golf for a while. Were you guys, were you still in contact? Were you still connected to each other?
We kept in touch, yes. She did used to come over to England periodically. I didn't come over to America as much as I do now, because transportation wasn't as easily accessible as it is now. But she came over once or twice. I remember in 1977 all the champions were invited, and she stayed with us. She stayed with us several times, actually, both when I was single and when I was married. And then when time moved on, and she wasn't very good with money, I have to say, and so she took a job with the borough of New Jersey, where she lived, Orange, New Jersey, and her job was to do presentations both for golf and for tennis on the stage, and talk about the benefits for health and social reasons and so on. And unfortunately, on one of those occasions, she had a stroke on the stage, and it finished. And she hadn't been with them for very long, I think just a couple of years, no more. And so she didn't really have a pension to speak of, and she wasn't able to save much money. I mean, she was lucky to be able to live from hand to mouth when she was playing. So she quickly ran out of money, and by this time I was traveling backwards and forwards, and I had been to see her in Orange, New Jersey, and she wasn't in a good state. And then one day, and it was about the early 90s, when I was in Florida, I was cooking some dinner on a Friday morning. She gave me a ring, and she said, "Angela, I just phoned up to say goodbye." And I said, "Well, where are you going?" She said, "I think I'm going to do myself in. I'm going to commit suicide." Oh, I said, "Just hang on a minute." I said, "Let me go and switch off the onions in the kitchen, and I'll phone you right back." So, don't go anywhere. So I phoned her, and she told me that she'd just run out of money. She hadn't got any money to pay the rent anymore, or to buy medication, or to buy food, nothing. And I said, "Well, look," I said, "don't do that." I said, I'll give you, how much does it cost you to live? How much is the rent and the food? Can you give me a sort of ballpark figure?" And she said $1,500 a month. So I said, "Look, I'll send you that." And she said, "Oh, no, you've got children, they need..." I said, "Look, they're all well taken care of, and I'll send you that, but I'll think of something else meantime." So I did. I mean, she didn't want me to do it, because she had tremendous pride, and she felt it was more than I should do. But anyway, I did. And it was during that time, and I was struggling and thinking, what can I do? Because I hadn't been living in Florida very long. I'd been living in Florida about a year, I think, and I didn't know as many people then as I know now. And I went to a function at what's now called the Miami Open, and it was in Key Biscayne. I think it was called the Liptons then, and it was in aid of the Miami children who needed help and to learn to play tennis and so on. And outside, as you entered, there was Bud Collins standing, selling his first book called The Encyclopedia of Tennis. And I didn't know him very well, but I knew who he was. And I went in because we'd bought tickets, and I sat down and I said to my friend Harry, I said, you know, he's very well connected in tennis, much better than I am. I said, I'm going to go back and have a word with him about the Althea situation, see if he can help. So I went out, and he was just packing up because he was just finished. And I introduced, he said, I know who you are. Wimbledon, doubles. I occupied a chapter of his book, you see. I said, that's right, that's who I am. I said, look, I've got a situation with Althea Gibson here. You might be able to help. I said, she's desperately in need of help. But he says, she doesn't answer the phone. I said, I know she doesn't. He says, because I've tried to phone her. I said, but she does answer the phone to me. Oh. So anyway, I told him what the situation was, and he had a word with Karen Feldman, who was the secretary of the WTA at the time, and she told all this, that anybody that stops me like that makes me much more resourceful and to overcome that. And that has been the story of my life. And so in a way, we had some similarity in common. And that DVD actually explains that. Of course, those situations are quite similar to today, really. It's not an isolated case, unfortunately. But as far as she's concerned, she did open the floodgates for people like Serena and Venus and Arthur Ashe, come to think of it, although they had difficulties. But if it wasn't for her, they wouldn't have even been able to open them.
You know, we don't get these opportunities that often. Angela, you've been an absolute champion in sticking around and being patient with us and giving us a chance to hear your story and get a little more insight into your relationship with Althea and what you both had to face back in those times. We're so glad you still come over to the U.S. Open. I know you had a little bit of issues with a little head injury. We hope you're feeling better. How are you feeling right now?
Yes, I feel fine, actually. Yes, thank you very much.
Well, thankfully, we're gonna wrap this up, and hopefully we'll get a chance to speak to you again in the near future. But thank you so much for spending time with us, and thank you for watching. We'll be back in a minute. Thanks so much.
In some people's houses, they have certain people's pictures. Particularly in African American houses, you'll think there's like a picture of Martin Luther King on the wall, maybe a picture of John F. Kennedy on the wall, a picture of Jesus Christ on the wall. What I can remember growing up on the top of our television set was an autographed picture of Althea.
There might have been some bitterness in Althea in that she didn't necessarily feel she was given her due for what she did. I have to remind people, talking about Arthur being the first African American to win Wimbledon. And I was always quick to correct people. No. He's the first African American male. But people forget that Althea came first.